Is the vaccine passport issue entirely partisan? Is it all Democrats on one side, all Republicans on the other, or is it more subtle than that?
I think it is more subtle than that. And the way I know that is, I looked at some of the newspaper articles that are written about me, and the comments or the like reactions were 6-1, 7-1 positively. So maybe it's just the people that are against this are really against this and more interested in it. But I do think there's a lot of people that, because as a society we've said we're not for discrimination generally, we've accepted public accommodation laws, whether some of your listeners agree with that. That's what most people have accepted. And so the idea that we're going to discriminate against people, whether it's flying or traveling or getting a job or even something as simple as going to the supermarket, I think, to a lot of people, that seems like a slippery slope. And, what we're talking about basically is dividing society into two groups, where one group then discriminates against the other group because they don't like the medical choices that the other group made. And I think most people think that's pretty extreme.
All right, so let's turn our attention to that. But first of all, my sense about New Hampshire is that although there is that live free or die spirit among some people, there is still plenty of political division in New Hampshire. And I bet there, as in almost all states, there is a bitter divide over exactly what the right approach to take with regard to the virus has been. How do you handle it? For example, the people you represent, where would you say most of them come down on this?
Yeah, I think it is a mix. New Hampshire is a purple state. I happen to come from a slightly more conservative area. But to be perfectly honest, Tom, I don't really care what's popular. But one of the things that upsets me the most about politicians is they just constantly stick their finger in the air and wait to see which way the wind blows. And leadership, in my eyes, is doing what's right and fighting for liberty, protecting people's rights, especially when it's not popular. So that's the way I look at it. Just with this effort on vaccine passports, over 1,000 people have signed this petition. And essentially the 1,000 people that have signed this petition are saying we're sick and tired of politicians telling us which of our rights we're going to be allowed to keep. A vaccine passport, let's call it what it is, it would create a medical caste system. And the last place that should exist is in the live free or die state.
Okay, so what is the nature of your bill? Are you the drafter of the bill? Are you a co-sponsor? What's your connection to it?
Yeah, so it's funny. When you get elected, they say there's 2 weeks, or I think it's actually a week, and that's the deadline to introduce a bill. They basically don't want freshman reps to introduce anything. But as you get in there, you start to learn the rules to work around the system. So in New Hampshire, any bill can get a vote on the floor, but also any bill, you can propose an amendment at any time, even if it's not germane. So I took SB 155, which is sort of a hodgepodge COVID bill, and I had a non-germane amendment. And I was able to find a committee where the committee chair was receptive and willing to hold a hearing on that. And essentially what the bill does is it stops any subdivision of the state government, any bureaucrat, from requiring a vaccine or a vaccine passport. Additionally, any company that does business with the state government or receives taxpayer funds would be prohibited from mandating a vaccine passport or vaccine for employees and also customers.
Okay, so now let's dig this apart here just for a minute. What would you say to somebody who says 99% of the time, somebody like you says that a private company is a private company. It can have any requirement it wants. It can say that while you're on our premises, you have to wear a funny hat. And the way you cope with that is say, well, if I don't want to wear a funny hat, I don't walk into that business. And that's the end of it. And so no transaction occurs unless both parties consent. And if one party doesn't consent, then there's no transaction. We don't violently interfere with that and say, well, we don't like this particular requirement you're imposing on people, so we're going to say that for this purpose, you're not really a private business. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's the question I'm getting all the time. And a lot of Democrats are bringing it up, even though they don't believe in that premise to begin with.
No, not at all.
Which is smart. I said if I was a Democrat, I'd be doing that too. I guess I'd say, number one, if you are a private business, say you're a coffee shop in Dartmouth, New Hampshire, a liberal college town, you can have a sign that says you have to have a vaccine passport still, as long as you don't get any taxpayer funding. But I'd say there's really two arguments in particular. Right to work is a good example. The government is essentially requiring the protection of our individual liberty in that example. because the government has already said you have to have the right to form a labor union. So if you have to have the right to form a labor union, then you should have the right to not join that labor union. So it's sort of a bill that needs to be passed because there's government there already to protect our individual liberty. It's a little convoluted, but I think that's a good example. And the second thing I would say is, this push for vaccine passports, it's not coming from businesses. Ultimately, businesses just want to survive. They just don't want their customers to disappear. It's being ginned up by radical leftist governors like Newsom and Cuomo, and these radical beliefs from big government leftist politicians are seeping into our culture. And in essence, they're almost being forced on people in society because the mainstream media is gaslighting the public. You can just look at the poll numbers for why Democrats are 3 times less likely to guess the correct hospitalization rate than Republicans. It's because of what they're being fed by the mainstream media. I saw poll data before coming on the show. 41% of Democrats think the hospitalization rate for COVID is over 50%. That's nuts. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, I agree. Those numbers have been pretty constant. For example, I know over in the UK, it's somewhere between 10 and 100 times when you ask people about hospitalizations or deaths or whatever. They're not even close. They're way, way, way off. What's interesting is that the more informed you are, the more likely you are to be able to put the whole thing in perspective. It's the people who are the ones telling us we have to take this seriously and whatever, who are consistently the least informed over and over and over. Now, just today, I saw the results of a survey where they asked people who were vaccinated and people who are unvaccinated, how comfortable are you doing the following things? And it was everything from going on a cruise to attending a conference, and then now going on a date, shopping at a mall, flying on a plane, dining at a restaurant. For every single response, the vaccinated people were the ones who felt less comfortable doing it, even though they've been vaccinated and they believe in vaccines and they want to hit us over the head about vaccines. Now, it could be, obviously, there's a built-in bias here because the kind of people who would seek the vaccine are already extremely risk-averse anyway. But all the same, the result is quite striking. Now, it's interesting to me that the one of those activities, there are probably maybe 15 or more activities listed here. The one that people are most likely to feel comfortable doing is dining in a restaurant. Least comfortable is going on a cruise. But I'm looking at this, and I mean, even at this stage, only half the vaccinated people feel comfortable going to the mall. And 31% of them feel comfortable flying on a plane, attending a sporting event. 29% of the vaccinated feel like they could attend a sporting event. 27% think they should go to the gym. I don't know what's going on here. It's like we have 2 different societies.
I think we do to some degree. Things have become so polarized. I have a family member that they're vaccinated and they won't eat at a restaurant inside. They'll eat at a restaurant outside. And they don't want to eat in a restaurant inside until we get to herd immunity, until more people are vaccinated. And we saw what Fauci said, maybe next Mother's Day we'll get back to normal. And part of it, honestly, a big part of the blame lies with Fauci. He traffics in fear and he lies to manipulate the public. He's really not interested in pointing out the science unless it reinforces his agenda. And just look the other day from the testimony with Rand Paul, where Rand Paul absolutely torched him. Fauci even supported funding labs in Wuhan and its radical experiments that some of these labs were conducting, like gain of function research, which possibly may have led to the creation of COVID-19. So he's really supporting some radical stuff. And I like to joke, Fauci, he makes even slightly more money than the president. And maybe that's fitting because he's just barely smarter than our president.
Yeah. Well, for anybody out there, I can't imagine people listening to this having a problem with it. Anybody out there finding it questionable to say that he lies, well, he more or less admitted it. He said that he had been moving the goalposts on herd immunity as he felt like the country was prepared to hear what he had to say. Well, that's another way of saying you're lying.
Exactly.
What else is that? I mean, he admits that it wasn't the truth time and again. What is that other than lying? So what else has he been doing this on? And then he's on, either side of an issue, depending on which person he talked to last or which person he's sitting in front of. And I could compile a whole bunch of areas where he said one thing and said another. And it absolutely is true that early on he was against the use of masks. It absolutely is true. He was not simply saying we need to conserve them for our healthcare workers. He was saying there are problems with masks. That it's not clear if they do any good. We don't have any data.
Yeah.
He was very clear about that. Then suddenly universal masking was the order of the day, and all that was just forgotten. It wasn't even, look, I know this might seem puzzling. However, I've decided that we just got no acknowledgement at all. It's been crazy.
But that's another great example is he wanted to deter mass usage because there was a shortage. So he sort of was like, well, we're going to talk about how I don't think it's good for the public. And he talks about that first as a justification for why it's okay that he was wrong on that. And you're right. It's just misleading. That's all it is to it.